Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my live stream, where I get a little bit better at this. Hopefully, a little with each passing day. All right. Um, so nice of you to join me again. I'm going to keep talking about Venus synodic cycles. Again, just sort of informally um, presenting some of the research that I've been doing over the years. Just some sort of cursory observations to share with you folks, at least part of how I use the synodic cycle of Venus in astrology. Um, well, actually, this isn't even going to be so much about how I use it, but just sort of some of the ways we can group the different intervals into identifiable sort of sections of time and of moments in people's lives and so forth. Hopefully I'm explaining that properly. That's part of the reason I'm doing these live streams is the planetary synodic cycles are actually really simple, really easy. But I tend to, when presenting this material, somehow make it sound more complicated than it really is. And if I'm doing that now again, you have my sincere apologies. Yeah, it's basically anyone who's seen the YouTube video that I made, Introduction to the Venus Synodic Cycle. The idea is very simply that the cycle of Venus is 8 years minus 2 days. And, excuse me. And if you imagine that 8 years as a circle, you can break that circle into 20 separate parts, each of which identify the 4 main sort of periods of the Venus synodic cycle: the morning star, the exterior conjunction, the evening star, and then the retrograde with the interior conjunction. So the morning star is white, the exterior conjunction is blue, the evening star is black, and the retrograde with the interior conjunction is the red interval. So it's a very sort of simple way, almost in a way, sort of like in the same way that the zodiac breaks down, 365 days into more or less equal groups of 12. This is kind of the same idea, except you're taking 8 years and breaking it down into more or less equal groups of 20. All right. So with that simple idea in mind, today what I thought I would show you is some of my observations on death of presidents. If I have time, today or tomorrow, or not tomorrow, I'll be live streaming again on Friday. But today I'm definitely going to look at US presidents. I might also look at Russian leaders and their deaths. But I'm not sure if I'm going to do that all in one day or if I'll break it down into 2. We'll see how this goes. Yeah. All right. Let's start with the screen share here. Righty, radio. Okay. That doesn't look very good. I think what I want to do, actually, I'll start here. Okay. Right. So this is just, before I get into the intervals, there are 20 intervals. There are also 10 phases of Venus. Again, this is all explained in the introduction video. And if you look, these are the birth charts, or the natal Venuses, the natal Venus phases, if you will, of every U.S. president, of the 45 men who have served as U.S. president. You can see it's not entirely evenly divided. For instance, there have been 8 setting A presidents, including the current one, Joe Biden. Ronald Reagan was a setting A, but before him, we hadn't had a setting A since Buchanan. Most of these setting A's were very early in American history: Adams, Jefferson, Madison. Adams again, both Adamses, Jackson, and then Buchanan. Those were all the sort of setting A's of the 19th century presidencies. But in the 20th century, we had Reagan, and in the 21st century, we have Biden. So obviously, like, the reason there've been 8 setting A presidents is because of how many of them there were. in the early days of the Union. But it's still something that sort of comes up. I mean, I think, if you look at, a lot of those earlier setting A presidents, yeah, I mean, it really is most of them. You can there's the Rising Sea was also popular in the early days. Monroe, Van Buren, and Tyler are among the Rising Seas, and later Grant and Hayes. Um, but yeah, there were so many setting A's. It's almost like it kind of it seems to really sort of vibe with the office of the presidency, if you will. There's just so many of them. But conversely, the opposite phase to the setting A is the rising A phase, and there's only ever been one rising A president, and that's McKinley, one of the few who's been assassinated. So that's kind of interesting in itself. That it's interesting when there's when there's a heavy concentration of one of the phases in some of these sort of sample groups that I do. It's also really interesting when there's next to none or very few of a given phase. I just find it interesting as I'm exploring the cycle that the distribution amongst people of an identifiable group, i.e., the 45 men who have served as president of the United States, that you can break it down into these really sort of interesting breakdowns. But it gets a lot more uneven, actually, the distribution, when we go to the intervals from the phases. Now, these are the intervals, the natal intervals. I haven't gotten into death yet. We're still talking about life. Okay, now there are 20 intervals. There's only 10 phases, so it's a little. It's not quite as striking when there's an uneven distribution amongst 10 phases, but when there's a really radically uneven distribution amongst 20 intervals, then it really the picture really gets a lot more interesting. So you can see here the top number for Venus intervals that U.S. presidents were born under is tied between the black 2 intervals and the white 5 intervals, which is really interesting because black 2 and white 5 straddle the red 1 interval, and there has never been a red 1 U.S. president. Which is, I'll get into some other red ones that we have had in U.S. government, and there's an interesting sort of line to that. I'm not sure if I'll get into that particular thread today, but if I don't, sort of take a mental note that there has never been a red 1 U.S. president, a president born during the red 1 Venus interval. Which is interesting because a whole lot of them have died under the red 1 interval, but no president has ever been born during the red 1 interval, nor has any vice president, FYI. But there've been a lot of black 2s and a lot of red 5s. So it's really weird that while there's no red 1, the 2 intervals that sort of, that are on opposite ends of red 1, that there've been so many. And that there's a sort of interesting type to them too. Now, the black 2s I spoke about the other day, in terms of like, there's a really, we've got Zachary Taylor, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and who's my other one? Oh, yes, Woodrow Wilson. So 2 of the 4 presidents who've either been impeached or come close to being impeached, that is Johnson and Nixon, are black 2s. The other 2, Trump and Clinton, are black 3s. So it's only been black interval presidents who've ever been impeached or almost impeached. I think it's also interesting too, like, Lincoln obviously enjoys a kind of reverence amongst U.S. presidents that really is sort of almost unique to him. Maybe George Washington also enjoys that sort of something at that level of reverence. But Lincoln's definitely up there as a black 2, and we associate him, of course, with the Civil War and the fight against slavery. So it's interesting that Lincoln being a black 2 interval, as I was showing the other day, people like Martin Luther King was a black 2, Rosa Parks was a black 2, Thomas Paine was a black too. There's a really interesting theme of black two presidents, either or black two Americans, either being sort of these really revered figures, or you get your Nixons and your Johnsons, your sort of your villains of history as well. It's really sort of divided between the two of them. Meanwhile, the white five presidents, there's a whole other thing going on here. The white five presidents are Rutherford B. Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, Taft, William Howard Taft, Warren Harding, and Barack Obama. Now, if Obama wasn't in that list, the other four are really sort of easily notable because the other four are these quite forgettable one-term presidents, rather. Rutherford Hayes served only one term between 77 and 81. Harrison was, I believe, 1889 to 1893, something like that, if I'm getting that correct. Taft was 1909 to 1913, and Harding was 1921 till his death in 1923. But then you get Obama, who was a two-term president, and he's got his fans, he's got his detractors, but he certainly isn't like an inconsequential one-term president. Even if you're an Obama hater, you wouldn't be able to quite say that. Although I'm sure you'd have plenty of other things to say. But anyway, the point being, it's interesting that Obama sort of sets a new mold for white five presidents. Ford is the other one I left out. Gerald Ford. And wait a minute, Hayes isn't a white five. I've been reading this wrong, but nonetheless, my position stands in that Ford is also an inconsequential one-term president. I'm sorry, I don't know why I was hallucinating and seeing a white five on Hayes' white three. Some of you, I'm not even checking the comments, but there's probably a bunch of you right now sort of yelling at me. Let me quickly check the comments. Or a bunch of you saying, "What the hell are you talking about?" Where is my Restream comments? Oh, no one's chatting at all. Or I'm not seeing it. Okay. Well, then I needn't worry about that. Okay, back to sharing my screen. Okay. Right. Okay, so those are the intervals that U.S. presidents were born under. There are other things I can say, but I'll come back to that. Let's move on to. Oh, these are the natal sun signs. You can see the sun. I just really put this up to say, when it comes to the sun signs, it's a lot more evenly distributed. I mean, sure, there've only been 2 Virgo and 2 Aries presidents, and there have been 6 Scorpio presidents. But relatively speaking, let's say compared to how you see the distribution amongst phases, and even more so the 20 intervals. I'm more interested when we're seeing these sort of heavy concentrations in one section and relatively light ones in others. You have a bit of that with the sun signs, but not nearly like you do with the intervals. And these are their natal Venus signs. And even still, okay, so 7 presidents have had Venus in Cancer. 6 presidents have had Venus in Pisces, and 5 have had Venus in Sagittarius. And Aries and Libra 4 each, but the rest, it's it's not so evenly distributed. It's interesting that while the sun signs, it's a little more so. Venus, a lot of presidents with Venus in Cancer, gotta say. Right. Okay, and now we're going to the deaths. So I've removed the presidents who are still alive. Jimmy Carter, who is admittedly very old. He's 98. He'll be 99 in October. But he is still with us. I don't feel I'm being too morbid in saying, well, he doesn't have that much long to go. I wish him a long, healthy life. He's doing a lot of good in the world. May Jimmy Carter live to be 120, but he is 98. But he's not on this list yet. So that's why you see this gap between Ford and Reagan down there. And of course, all the presidents who followed George H.W. Bush in office are still alive. Clinton, Bush, Trump, and Obama, and so forth, and Biden. There, I almost remembered them all. I almost got them in the proper order, almost. Anyway, these are the presidents. These are the Venus phases that were in place at the time of these presidential deaths. It is somewhat skewed. There are, 5 signs where it's quite common, and then 5 signs where it's not so common. That's interesting in and of itself. Note that it's setting D, rising B, and setting C that have 6 phases each for death. But now it gets really interesting once again when we go to phases, to intervals rather. These are deaths of U.S. presidents and the 20 Venus intervals. So you saw it's not like with the 12 sun signs, the 12 Venus signs, admittedly, it's a little sort of off balance, but not quite like this. U.S. presidents overwhelmingly die during red 1 and white 2 intervals. Remember, red 1, there has never been a red 1 president, never been a president born during a red 1 interval. But 5 have died during the red 1 interval. And which is tied for first place for the number of presidential deaths under a given interval. And note that no president has ever died during a black 2 interval, and yet a lot of presidents have been, were born during black 2 intervals. And let's look at the different presidents. I think I have to skip down here a bit. Yeah, let's look at the different presidents. See if this is gonna look good for me. Yeah, see this is why I don't play these slides, because this counter thing gets blurry. So I'm just going to show it like this without actually playing the slide. All right. So William Henry Harrison was the first president to die in office. He died like a month into his term, April 4th, 1841. I think he'd literally been inaugurated exactly a month earlier. So yeah, he campaigned very hard. He famously gave like a really long speech in cold weather, and some people think that killed him. Other people think he died much the way a few of his successors would die, by drinking the dirty drinking water of Washington, D.C. Polk and Taylor. Well, Taylor very likely died because of that tainted water. Polk may have also died that way. But anyway, here's Henry Harrison. He died during a red 1 interval in office. Then there's Polk, who, as I just mentioned, might have also died from drinking the dirty water that Harrison died. Polk died just after leaving office. His term ended in March, and he died in June of 1849. So this is 8 years after William Henry Harrison. So Polk had just left office. He was a very deliberate single-term presidency. I think he's the only president who had been Speaker of the House. Is that right? No. That can't be right, because Johnson was Speaker of the House. Anyway, Johnson was Senate leader. No, I think Polk was Speaker of the House. That's right. Anyway, he died during a red 1 interval, not while he was in office, but not too long after. Now, the third presidential red 1 interval death is very familiar to us. This is, of course, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the first presidential assassination. Remember that the first president to die in office, Harrison, was a red 1, and now the first president assassinated this was also during a red 1 interval. So he was shot on April 14th and died the next morning, April 15th, during a red 1 interval. And then the next president to be assassinated and die in office is a little bit more complicated. James Garfield was shot during a red 1 interval. This is 16 years after Lincoln's death. But when he was shot, it was after the direct station. It was, in fact, 38 days after the direct station. So Venus was no longer retrograde, but just sort of coming out of its retrograde, but still in the red 1 phase. The red one phase is when phase ends when Venus reaches its greatest eastern elongation, which is about 51 days after the direct station. So by the time Garfield was alive for like 2.5 months before he finally died, and the story of his death is sort of tragic and hilarious at the same time, but I won't get into that. He didn't die during a red one interval, but he was shot during a red one interval, which is why I keep him mentioning here. And yeah. All right. And so we didn't lose another president during a red one interval until Franklin Roosevelt died in the last days of the Second World War. It's interesting that both he and Lincoln died just as their respective wars were ending. I mean, in Lincoln's case, it had ended. In Roosevelt's case, it was ending. It was going to be over in a few weeks. But Roosevelt died in office during a red one interval. And finally, the last presidential death. This wasn't in office, but Dwight Eisenhower also died during a red one interval. He died in March of '69, which was not long after his former VP Richard Nixon was inaugurated president. So that's 5. 5 deaths in that interval. Let's see, what did I want to show you? I guess I also wanted to show you Russia, but I'm not very well prepared. I might have to, yeah, I will have to. Yeah, I'll have to get to Russia in another talk because I'm not sure where that slideshow is. What can I tell you, folks? There we are. Oh, I see. It's a chat overlay. Okay, okay. Kai is asking, what interval were McKinley and Kennedy assassinated under? All right, this gets interesting. Kai, always asking the best questions. Let me set this up here. Bear with me. Keep weeding, Ty. You might be my only listener right now. I'm not sure. So I won't worry about it. I'm just opening my McKinley keynote slide because there are some interesting things to say about all the assassinations. And I'm glad you brought up Kennedy because I've read I don't know, 15 or 20 books on the Kennedy assassination over this past few months. Very, very interesting stuff. I'm working in a sort of an astrological study of all the different figures involved in the story of that assassination. All the different suspects and figures involved and what have you, and it's very interesting, but it's sort of complex, obviously, and it is a bit anomalous to other sort of presidential deaths, if you will, or presidential assassinations, I should say. All right, so I've got my McKinley file open now. Just want to show you. Do I have what I wanted to show you in this? Oh, no, I don't even have it. Okay, so I'm just going to, it's like no matter how many slides I make, I got to make more slides. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you into my database and show you this and not worry about the fact that I don't have slides to accompany what I'm showing you. All right, so I'll go to my McKinley file. There we are. Right, so McKinley lived for just over a week after he was shot, but he was shot during a black 5 interval. You can see it's an evening star here. It's a black 5 interval, but the red one works its way into this story really interestingly. First of all, the assassin, the guy who pulled the trigger on William McKinley, was a guy named Leon Czolgosz. I'm probably butchering his name. Czolgosz, I think, something like that. I really try my best. I try harder than most Anglos to pronounce foreign names and words correctly, but this is not a good example of that. Anyway, despite my best efforts, this assassin was a red one. So, Lincoln was shot and died under a red one. The guy who shot Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth, was a red 4, incidentally. Garfield was shot during a red 1, died during a white 5. His assassin was a white 5. But in this case, the shooter is a red 1. So the guy who killed McKinley is a white 1, even though McKinley wasn't killed during a red 1. The killer was a red 1. And the other interesting thing, I don't know if you can see this in my database. Maybe if I can't make my screen bigger anymore. Leon Czolgosz was a red 1 interval. He's born the 5th of May, 1873. But as it happens, McKinley and his wife had a daughter named Ida, who was born April 1st, 1873. She was also a red 1 interval. She only lived a few months. And when she died, and then they had another daughter die 2 years later, this really sort of ruined Mrs. McKinley. She spent her whole time as First Lady sort of mourning her children who'd been dead for, at that point, nearly 30 years. And it's just ironic to me that the man who killed her husband was born very, very close, like just over a month after this infant daughter who died, who was also a red 1. It's just one of these interesting things that you find when you dig into dates and the way these sort of things connect to each other. Right. So that's McKinley. Now, Kennedy, as I warned you, my Kennedy file is fairly large. 254 charts. So, and it's got really like just anyone related to the Kennedy story, from Jim Garrison to Dobrynin of Russia, Patrice Lumumba, Robert F. Kennedy, obviously, Ralph Abernathy, Earl Rose, who was the coroner for the shooting, just that all these different people. David Atlee Phillips, who's a CIA agent, one of the people suspected in the plot. J.D. Tippit, the Dallas police officer who was allegedly shot by Lee Harvey Oswald after the Kennedy assassination. Lee Bowers, who was one of the witnesses. Lee Bowers was he was working at the train yard. He was in this tower and he had a good view of what was behind the grassy knoll. And he said he saw someone, who could have been the shooter from the grassy knoll from where he was. And he said as much to, he sort of stuck to his story. I think I can't remember if he did actually testify to the Warren Commission or not, but he definitely did make an appearance in this documentary where he repeated his story that totally, contradicts the Warren Report official narrative. And Lee Bowers is one of, I think, 72 people who just mysteriously died, when they were either about to testify or when they were sort of sticking to their counter narratives or what have you. There's a great book written by the comedian Richard Belzer, who some of you may know as a TV actor. I forget which one of those, is it Law and Order? One of those shows, one of those cop lawyer shows that I only have watched occasionally. But Richard Belzer, really funny comedian, talented actor. He wrote this great book called Hit List. And it's just about all the different people related to the Kennedy assassination who wound up meeting unfortunate ends. Really, easy read, interesting read. And even if you know very little about the Kennedy assassination altogether, it's a interesting thing. Anyway, I'm just sort of showing you like this is how deep the weeds go. So Kennedy was assassinated during a Black 4 interval. Here he is. This is the um, Black 4 interval. Not long after the Blue 5, we had gone from a Blue 5 to a Black 4 interval, and Lee Harvey Oswald was natally a Blue 5 interval. The Red 1 that I know about in the Kennedy assassination, and it is someone who's shooting Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. The Red 1 in the Kennedy assassination, the Red 1 shooter, if you will, is Abraham Zapruder. He wasn't shooting with a gun, he was shooting with a camera. Abraham Zapruder, you can see he's got the Venus retrograde in Aries here. Abraham Zapruder is the guy who filmed, if you've only ever seen one film of the Kennedy assassination, it's his film that you've seen. Yeah, it's an iconic piece of cinema that if you've never seen it, then you probably know absolutely nothing about the Kennedy assassination. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff about, when you look at all the other sort of presidential deaths, they all, or mostly, largely sort of fit a certain kind of astrological pattern. And the Kennedy assassination is completely different from all the others. And I'll let you make of that what you will. It's probably self-evident at this point where I kind of stand on this. But yeah. Okay, just reading everyone's comments of 13. My vote is on doing whatever you want, especially if it's about assassins. Okay, I'm just catching up on comments. Oh, why do I have another YouTube up? Thank you, Danny P, with 2 people waiting. I'm doing this all automatically on Restream. So I don't know why I would have 2 YouTube streams announced. Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm just going through the comments here, catching up. Am I putting it in my intervals in a spreadsheet? I mean, to some extent, yes. Actually, I do have a spreadsheet, but the material is almost too vast for that. What I'm really doing is doing my best to learn how to use AI, because this database, what it's capable of. Okay, thank you, Kai. I'm seeing you. Okay, so doesn't connect to the. Okay, Kai, what you just said sounds really plain, simple, and logical, and I don't have the faintest clue what you mean right now, but I'll do my best to make sense of it after the fact. But I'm sort of also in my astrology head sheet. Okay, yes, thank you, Kai. I appreciate that. Yeah, being a human ephemeris is no guarantee of competence in any other realm of life. Just so you know, if any of you are sort of building me up any larger than that, it's time to burst that bubble. Fortuna Moon, I was going to ask the same thing. In your Venus cycles presentation, you have a brief snippet of the different time periods as examples. Do I have a chart anywhere of these time periods? Yeah, I mean, what do I have? I've got, first of all, I have the database. So like I'm saying, this here, I'll share my screen with you again. I did make a spreadsheet quite some time ago that has some of the data, but I make so much of it. So first of all, I have the database. This doesn't tell me anything about the intervals because, of course, I quote unquote invented the intervals. So there's no software that does them yet, but that's one of the things I'm trying to get out of AI is to sort of create a software program that'll just automatically tell you what interval and phase you're under according to the system I've devised. But yeah, I have these, studies that I've been doing for over 20 years of different biographies famous politicians, artists, musicians, authors, filmmakers, all kinds of people. Anyone who's sort of famous enough to have a biography written of them, really. So I have that, and then what I also have is just all these different keynote slides that, of course, I always have to download again every time I'm giving a talk because I don't have enough memory on my computer to have them all downloaded and available at the same time. But I have just, like um, keynote slide presentations on Venus intervals for, different countries. There's South Africa, Latin America, Middle East, Turkey, and different places. Any country that I'm studying, and any that this is just that's the problem. There's so many of these keynote slides that I haven't even made yet, and it's very time consuming. So this is what I'm trying to get out of AI is to do all the stuff I do, but a lot faster and more efficient and bigger. I'm kind of limited by my capacity as a human being with a limited lifespan, and the fact that I need to sleep 8 hours a day, and all that stuff, all that interference. So yeah, that's what I'm really working on now is I need a better spreadsheet. I mean, this is what the AI would be, is just some sort of mega brained spreadsheet. The spreadsheet itself is too small to really handle this material. I know I make it sound really pompous the way I put it, but it really is. I mean, the idea behind doing this study, I mean, first of all, as a historian, as a history buff, I mostly know modern history going back to the 18th century. Like that's the ephemeris, having the ephemeris memorized. It's really just sort of from about the 7 Years' War, or what you call the French Indian War in the States, mid 18th century, through the Revolutionary War, French Revolution, then all through the 19th, 20th centuries to modern times. But I'm trying to understand, and also, I'm somewhat Western focused. I'm trying to be a geopolitical historian and all that, and I've gained some ground on that. But largely, I'm sort of Western focused. So I'm constantly trying to broaden my horizons and study other sort of national histories and other eras. Studying the Mongols. I didn't realize how much astrology I could get out of the Mongol invasions, even though we don't have birth dates for Genghis Khan or any of them. We do have the dates of all their battles and conquests and stuff, and so there's a lot to learn from that. Yeah, just I mean, the Persian calendar, the Chinese calendar, the Ethiopian calendar. There's so much history. So that's it's so vast. And if I can do what I've been doing with modern history and sort of extend that to history, I expect I'm going to get sort of similar results, but on a much larger scale. And it's already sort of compelling enough, like just the 200 and something years of history that I'm working with, 275 years of history that I'm working with. It's amazing how many of these sort of patterns just present themselves when you're looking at synodic cycles. But yeah, I want to see how far this goes, because it's almost too limiting, too small to merely talk about 275 or whatever years of history. It's got to be more. That's the way I think. Okay. Grand scale. I just want to catch up. Bliss to be says, I know this isn't a question about the Venus cycle, but could I quickly touch on any examples of famous people whose chart ruler had gone retrograde by secondary progression? That's a really good question, Bliss to be. I asked this before and you noted it, but I'm trying to find a place where I can delve into this further. Any tips would be amazing. Let me think. That there have to be. Why don't I tell you what, Bliss to be? Let's look for this together here and now. Right. So I'm going to go to my just general natal file. or better yet, general natal timed, because the general natal just has all birthdays. All right, let me see. I'm going to just look for someone who has a Libra ascendant, or let's start with a Taurus ascendant. Let's see if I find anyone who's got a progressed Venus I know is going to go retrograde. Venus and Mars are the easiest ones to do off the top of my head. I could always, extend it to the other visible planets. Right, just let this thing run its course. Oh no, wait, sorry. I was searching the wrong file. Silly me. There we are. Okay. So let's see. These are Taurus risings that I have. So anyone that I can see, these people are too young. No, Snoop didn't have progressed Venus go retrograde. Oh, Natasha Gregson Wagner did. I don't know that much about her life. She's Natalie Wood's daughter. She's a 29-degree Taurus rising, so that may or may not be on the ball. Just out of curiosity, how old was she when her progressed Venus went retrograde? '20. And she was 20 in 1990. Yeah, the only thing I know about her, she was in a movie in 1997, and she's written a book about her mother, but she's not really going to be a very good example. She's just not famous enough. Let's try this list again. I hope this is interesting to people. Crispin Glover. Oh, he's awesome. Okay, so he's a Taurus rising, and he would have progressed Venus go retrograde. Let's see how old he was. Oh, I see Rodney King's also there. Let's just in case. Oh no, but Rodney King would never have Venus go retrograde. Okay, forget him. We're not just looking at Taurus risings. We're looking at Taurus risings who conceivably could have had progressed Venus go retrograde, which would be their chart ruler. And this would be true for Crispin Glover, who at the age of 38, so he's born 38 days, which would make that 2002. Yeah, I don't know what Crispin Glover was up to in 2002. Okay, he's still not quite famous enough. But you see, this is how I would take your question. I just, I I have to go through it. Like if I don't find any with Taurus rising, I'll try it with Libra rising. And then if I don't find a perfect Venus retrograde example that I can cite because I know the person's life well enough, then I'll move over to Mars. And somehow we'll find someone, because that's a really, really good question. And sort of the natural thing to look into. All things being, let's see here. No, Sigourney would be way too old when her Venus would go retrograde, I'm sure. She's a black 5, but that Venus of hers would go retrograde in like January of 1950. But no, that's too old. She may or may not live to be old enough to have progressed Venus go retrograde. Who else do I have here? Is there anyone that you're calling out for in the chat? No. What is that? Brendan Fraser. I'll look at him. I'd be really. Yeah, Kai says Mayan Olmec and Aztec history. That's exactly what I'm wondering. All these ancient calendars, the history that's recorded in them. That's the kind of thing I want out of AI. Kate's surprised I haven't gone mad. How do you know? I'm totally in. Talk to my wife or mother, or maybe I've been. I've been following your channel for social politics, but your data keeps me wondering if my Venus retrograde in Scorpio is a doom placement. No, Sarah, it's not a doom placement. Lots of really awesome people have Venus retrograde, not to mention Venus retrograde in Scorpio. As soon as I'm done on this little search here, I'll prove it to you. But I mean, we wouldn't have Jodie Foster, Demi Moore, a lot of really awesome people with Venus retrograde in Scorpio. Matt Damon, born just at the station, I think. Yeah, I don't want to hear that kind of silliness. It's not doomed. I mean, it may doom you to certain things, it may, reflect tastes you have and, uh, um, sort of how you socialize, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're doomed in some kinda terrible way. Um, let's see. Okay, well, Joe Rogan has it. I'm sure now, one thing before the haters speak up, this is actually something I've been wanting to say to the audience for a while. Um, I study everyone. I study people that I admire and respect, and and I study people who I do not admire and do not respect. Joe Rogan, I'm kind of in the middle of. Sometimes he's fine, sometimes he's really not. I'm not like a regular watcher of his show, but when he has a guest that I'm interested in, I'm agnostic on Joe Rogan, but it's irrelevant. And if he's someone that you really dislike, I hope it wouldn't prevent you from picking up his chart if there was something relevant, like right now, where I'm trying to sort of find a progressed Venus going retrograde for someone who has Venus as a chart ruler. My three favorite charts to study in history are Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Richard Nixon. And I promise you, I have nothing but sort of contempt for all three of their regimes. I study them as human beings. That's a little more interesting. They're obviously very flawed people, but again, it's sort of irrelevant. I don't get into astrology for hagiography. I don't get into it just to talk about people that I worship or admire or anything like that. You got to be a bit more. It's to do what I'm doing. Yeah, it's fine. We all have opinions. We all have our biases, but I'm not going to let those sort of get in the way of learning more astrology. And you can learn just as much, if not more, astrology from people that you're not in awe of as those that you are. All right. So without further ado, I hope that makes sense to people. Oh, but Joe does have Venus retrograde already. How many days after the station was he born? 2 days. Okay. So, all right. So he doesn't qualify either. You can see how this is sort of a long exercise. What about Dave Navarro? No, but he's not a Taurus rising. Oh, that's because I'm not looking at my list anymore. All right, enough with the Taurus rising. Let's try a Libra rising. The same exercise. I hope people are finding this interesting, but this is just the work I would be doing to answer the question on my own. Off stream, I may as well do it on stream, I suppose. You can see I have a lot of famous people here. Stevie Wonder, no, that's after the Venus, though. No, gotta have the right one. Oh, speaking of people with Venus, okay, well, she has Venus in Sagittarius. Okay, this is probably going to be a good example. Suzanne Summers, the Venus retrograde in Scorpio, of course, used to happen in Sagittarius. 1946 would have been the last time. And Suzanne Summers, for those of you who don't know, she was a sitcom star in the 70s, a show called Three's Company. She's got Venus here at 0 Sagittarius. She must be born just before the retrograde station. 11 days. Yeah, that's right. In 1946, it went retrograde at 2 degrees Sagittarius. And then 8 years later, in 1954, it went retrograde at 0 Sagittarius. And then in 1962 was the first full retrograde in Scorpio. So this is Suzanne Summers, who at the age of 11, that would have been around 1957, 58, her progressed Venus would have gone retrograde, and she's a Libra rising. Now, I know stuff about her sort of, I do have a file on her, but I don't know what was going on in her life at the age of 11. In my file here, I think the earliest event I have, okay, she got married in 1965. And she was arrested in 1970 for writing bad checks. I think she was just a struggling single mom at the time. Yeah, she was taken to custody, booked, printed, strip searched. She avoided prosecution by promising to make reparations and cover the check. All right, there you are. Hey, everyone's written a bad check here or there. Well, not me, but it's because I don't write checks anymore. I guess none of us do anymore. Anyway, that's Suzanne Summers. I don't know. That's not a very conclusive example because I don't know what she was doing when she was 11. So we'll have to go to the file again. But you can see what a sort of. I'm sure I can find like several examples, but you just need to look. You need to know where to look, and you have to be patient. But it's a really good question. I'm sure I've come across it before. It's just not sort of popping into my head who the example was. And of course, I have so many. And it's a good test to be able to see like who can I follow through things? You know, whose life have I followed closely enough that I really know where they were for, you know, most years of their life. Let's see. He's probably already retrograde, yeah. Gee, okay, well, I can be at this for a long time. I don't necessarily mind. I'd really like to find the perfect example. Could take up the whole stream doing this, though. It's not a Venus retrograde, though. Oh, Bill Clinton. Yeah, he might be. Now, Bill Clinton's a black 3. He's not even a red 2, but his progress chart would move into a red 2. How old does he have to be before that Venus of his goes retrograde? 69, which isn't very long ago. That's 2015. That's just before his wife was going to lose a big election. Yeah. Okay. So Bill Clinton, 69. Let's look at his progress chart here. Bill's interesting for all kinds. So there's his progress Venus retrograde. Let's just go back and see exactly when it plays out, when the station happens. Oh, there we are. Yeah, so you can see it slowing down in 2015. And then the S turns red by April of 2016. So this is just prior to his wife losing the election, which I think has at least something to do with that progress Venus going retrograde, insofar as it shows up in his chart. He's certainly one of the people I would look at. Where are you? Who was it? Oh, yeah, there you are. Bliss to be. Okay. Okay, I'm just reading through comments again. Yeah, okay. Great comments. Thanks, everyone. Naomi Blanca says Clinton's Venus was going retrograde around when he was kicking balloons around the stage at DNC. That's probably correct. Warren G might be Venus retrograde in the natal that's famous. Warren G. Which Warren G are we talking about? Who am I missing out here? Why is Warren G like Madonna and we can just refer to him by his first name? Or is he like Kenny G? Is he Kenny G's brother? Does he also play saxophone? Who? Oh, okay, rapper. You're asking a guy in his 50s about someone who's only been famous for a few years. Oh, okay. I know who Snoop Dogg is. How old is Warren G? Am I embarrassing? Is he some guy from the 90s that I don't remember? I mean, I was following hip hop in the 90s, but old guys with gray beards, you can't expect us to know some guy who's, you know, only been out for a few years. I should probably be embarrassed. If you guys knew me when I was 21, Warren G's 52. Okay, I'm really embarrassing myself here. I promise you, when I was in my early 20s, I knew every musician, every underground record label, everybody. Um, Snoop, I always liked him okay, but that's right around when I was losing interest in hip hop. Was the early '90s. I was sort of a Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, kind of guy. Um, yeah, and I still, if I listen to hip hop, it's usually '80s stuff. So yeah, I'm an old fart. Sorry, I didn't know who Kenny Warren G is. I keep thinking of Kenny G. Um, but yeah, okay. I'm not sure, why did Warren G come up? I think of him as being kind of obscure. Um, what is his birthday? There he is, 52 years old. Oh, November 10th, 1970. Okay, I can see. So he's a red two. Um, but we don't have his birthday time, do we? We don't know his rising sign, do we? Or maybe we do. Nope. Warren G. Harding, but that's not the same thing. So I don't have a birth time. He's born in Long Beach, California, which means AstroSeek. Do not use AstroSeek. AstroSeek have no sources for their times. Use AstroDataBank or don't use anything. Okay. No, AstroSeek. He's not an AstroDataBank. So if he's not an AstroDataBank, but he's born in California, which makes it fairly easy to get a birth certificate, provided we know his mother's maiden name and things like that. So yeah, Watson and I often collaborate to find interesting people to study. So that's conceivable that we could get Warren G's birth certificate. But he's born November 10th, 1970. So his progressed Venus wouldn't go retrograde. He'd be born with Venus already retrograde. Thank you, Channel 12. Cool. So yeah, long story short, I mean, I can keep sort of looking for Bliss to be to find an even better example than Bill Clinton. But I think with Bill Clinton, you already get some sense of that progressed Venus turning around by secondary progression, right at the time when the Clinton sort of political machine loses its wheels. Right? I mean, most of us, whether we were, whether we supported Democrats or whether we supported Republicans, everyone sort of expected Hillary to win 2016. I mean, even even Trump did. We were all caught off guard by that. I've gone on record, saying, I got it wrong like everyone else, because for me, I was always looking at 2024 for Trump. I was always looking at the Uranus and Gemini, but in 2016, it just seemed, well, he would be way too old to run in 2024. What am I thinking? But of course, I outsmarted myself or outdumbed myself, one of the two. But yeah, 2016, as Bill's progressed Venus, the ruler of Ascendant is going retrograde. Yeah, the wheels come off the whole sort of Clinton machine. And even though it's his wife who loses the election and not him, the Billary thing is real. I mean, they are a unit. When he was president, she was sort of like his co-president to some extent. And that probably would have been the case if she'd gotten in the office. There is one thing, since I'm on the subject of Bill, maybe I'll make this I'm running out of steam here, but this has been fun. I think this has been my favorite live stream so far, folks. So, thank you for your continued encouragement. I'll just take us back since I got us on Bill Clinton. Just a little interesting piece of astrology here that I always think of when I see his ascendant. Yeah, there we are. All right, I'm about to get a little sort of X-rated on my live stream here. Although I'll couch it in euphemism and what have you. We're calling this the blue dress encounter. Excuse me. If you don't know what I'm talking about, well, bless you. Uh, keep going through life with no idea what I'm talking about. But most of you probably know exactly what I mean by the blue dress encounter. So this is a timed event. We know when this happened. February 28th, 1997, around 6:40 p.m. And this was a Mars retrograde on Bill's ascendant. Mars had stationed retrograde at 5 Libra on his ascendant with the Mars Neptune there and all this. And Saturn was on his descendant. And then there's all these sort of sextiles and like this Pluto in Sag is trine the Saturn and sextile the Mars. And then the Uranus is trine the Saturn, sextile the Saturn, sextile the Pluto, trine the Mars, so on and so forth. Very interesting arrangement of planets at the time. February of 97, I was studying astrology for 2 years at that point, but I remember really being struck by the weirdness of the transits. And later on, when it turned out this was the blue dress encounter, it made a certain amount of sense to me. But yeah, whenever I see Bill's ascendant with the Mars Neptune there, I always think of this Mars retrograde on his ascendant on that fateful night where he well, we know what he did. Thank you for indulging us, Nick. Oh, thank you, Kate. Okay, and all right. Mad Hippie's Life, thank you. Okay, Bliss to be. You seem to be relatively satisfied with what I pointed out. Good. And yeah, I think your instincts are bang on. That's exactly the excellent question. One that deserves a lot more investigation. I've always noticed that progress stations always seem to be meaningful, even if they're not. If it doesn't involve the planet that's a chart ruler, progress stations are just. Yeah, they're always something. They always tell you something about the person's life. They're really, really reliable. And I don't think they necessarily need to be the chart ruler in order for that to be the case. But that being said, I think Bill's progress Venus going retrograde when it did really illustrates the point beautifully that obviously it is going to be that much more central in the person's life when it is the chart ruler. All right. Well, this has been fun. This has been, I'm going to be honest, like this is sort of a tough adjustment, particularly to do the live solo streams. The chats with Watson are easy enough because it's a conversation with a friend. That was always the idea. He and I just like talking. We said, well, why not just, have our conversations on camera and let people witness them, and join in and what have you. But this is just, this is, kind of like my notebook in a way. I just want to sort of review the research I've been doing and be I've got a very sort of spontaneous, free flowing style anyway. So I rarely come into a live stream with any kind of plan in terms of what I'm going to talk about. And I think as we go further, I'll feed off your questions more and more because it's really enjoyable. And that way I don't have to work so hard thinking about what to say. I can just sort of respond and react. And that's, I think, suits me just fine. So yeah, I'm going to bid you all a good afternoon. If you're watching this after the live stream, thank you for tuning in and watching the whole thing. And if you folks keep enjoying what I'm doing here, I'll keep doing it. And I'll see you Friday. I'm shooting for 1 p.m. Eastern time. For as I sort of find my way with the live streaming, that might change at some point. Maybe at some point I'll do it later in the day or earlier in the day. I'm not sure yet, but for the time being, I'm going to do it at 1 p.m. Eastern time. In a few weeks, I'm going to be back on the West Coast in Vancouver. I'll probably still do it at the same time, which will be 10 a.m. Pacific time. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And if I'm going to change the time of the streams, I'll let you folks know beforehand. And hopefully I just, get better at the little details of doing all this. But for the time being, I'm relatively satisfied with how this played out. So thank you all. Have a marvelous Monday afternoon, and I will see you all Friday. Good day.